Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, what's up, everyone? We are here today with Declan. We're super excited. So, Declan, you want to quickly introduce yourself? I think people around crypto Twitter know Declan already. I'm super excited to actually have this discussion. We want to understand a little bit what's kind of popping, what is happening around Linea, what's the landscape around layer 2 fragmentation, and why kind of we should care about this kind of 7702 post-spectra era. And I mean, Declan, it's a great honor to have you here. And let's dive in. You want to quickly introduce yourself?
Thanks, Francesco. Hi, everyone. So my name is Declan Fox, the head of Linea, which is a layer 2 helping to scale Ethereum.
Nice, nice, super exciting. So let's actually start with why kind of Linea started and what's the story, right? I'm a little bit biased because obviously people know me, and I'm super excited to the fact that we've been building, we've been researching. Consensus has been always in the background, researching and contributing to Ethereum, and this is kind of how we started. But you want to kind of push your version?
Yeah, definitely. So when we looked back in 2018, 2019, it's quite clear that Ethereum was not going to be able to scale by itself, right? We had the CryptoKitties craze, ICOs, gas fees were going astronomical, so we needed to come up with a solution. And that's when we came up with rollups. Okay, so we're actually going to take the execution, take it off Ethereum, and then find a way to validate that and send it back to Ethereum. Okay, very simple. The idea behind Linea was that there was two paths. You could either have an optimistic rollup, which you sort of optimistically batch up the transactions and send them to Ethereum. If there's any sort of issue with the transaction, then someone could challenge it. But there was another path which was a bit more challenging, which was the zero knowledge path, zk path. And this you'd actually process the batches, send them to Ethereum, and follow them up with what's called a validity proof, which is a type of snark, zk proof. Okay, and that was much more difficult to do, but it was much more secure. It allowed us to sort of scale computation in a verifiable manner. And then the second problem was that we had this sort of network infrastructure effect of the EVM, right? Like the EVM is massive. It's the most adopted stack today. I looked in the Electric Capital developer report recently. And you can see that the EVM stack has over 1,000 experienced developers. I think number 2 was the SVM stack on Solana, which was around 150. So the EVM has these strong network effects, and we needed to make sure that was carried over into layer 2. So putting those together, we have the zk part and the EVM part. And then Linea was all about putting those together as the zkEVM and then actually launching a sort of production zkEVM rollup to help scale Ethereum.
Nice. No, it makes total sense. And I mean, I know you're leading product, but what people kind of see that you kind of know a little bit everything. In crypto Twitter, you're kind of jumping from one topic to another. So my question is all about let's bring or clear a little bit the water and about all this kind of layer 2 fragmentation. Linea, I remember your prover kind of talks, very similar to a scroll stack. Give us a little bit this type 1, type 2, type 3, kind of I remember also Vitalik came out to say from 2025, I'm only mentioning specific types of layer 2. Where are we at? But most important is that what kind of type is Linea working on towards?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of 2 different tracks here. First, you have what I would call the L2 beat framework. And this is the sort of stage 0, stage 1, stage 2. And this is all about the maturity of the rollup. So today, Linea is a stage 0 rollup. It has training wheels. These are sort of guardrails, as we mature the technology. What we want to get to is the final end game, which is a stage 2 rollup. And the stage 2 rollup has no training wheels. It's effectively a trust minimized rollup. What we need to do to get there today for Linea is we need to add what's called an escape patch. So basically, if the Linea sequencer was censoring you or it went down, you could always send a transaction to the layer 1 and get your funds off of Linea. And then the part for stage 2 is what we call the multi-prover. And this is quite challenging because today you have a single prover, right? Every time a batch is sent to the layer 1 from Linea, it's sent with a single zero knowledge proof, which is great, but it's not good enough because what if there's an issue with that proof? Okay, you've got a single point of failure. So the multi-prover means that we're sending multiple proofs, and then as long as there's sort of a quorum, let's say 2 out of 3 agree, then we know that it's quite likely the rollup is sound. And so once we get to that, then we have a stage 2. We're aiming at Linea to get to stage 2 by the end of this year, end of 2025, which is a pretty aggressive timeline, but it's what's necessary to kind of get rollups more mature. And then you have the other track, which is this type zkEVM, right? So you have the type 1, type 2, all the way up to sort of a type 3, 4. At the type 4 level, you have what is essentially not an EVM. right, is a zkEVM that can still like compile Solidity code. But there's always these sort of inefficiencies and complexities underneath the hood. Okay, that was where like many teams started when they thought zkEVM was impossible. Then we have what Linea is today, which is a type 2 zkEVM. This is where we're able to take EVM bytecode, so your like same Solidity smart contracts, and compile them using the Sol-C compiler, and it all works like exactly the same as Ethereum. And then you have what we're trying to get to, again, hopefully by end of this year, which is a type 1 zkEVM. And that's when we have the exact same like internal state representation as Ethereum, which means we can start to prove Ethereum blocks directly. And once we can do that, we can start to snarkify the L1, the Ethereum itself. And the reason that's cool is because you can get to a point where the block proposer can actually construct the block on Ethereum. And then it can send that to all the different nodes along with a ZK proof. And they don't need to rebuild that block. They just verify the zero knowledge proof, which means you could, contribute to the decentralization of Ethereum with your smartphone. You could receive a block and verify it on your smartwatch or your smartphone. And that's super cool. It's great for decentralization. That's the goal. So TLDR, Linea's goal is to be at the end of 2025, a type 1 zkEVM. And it will be the only zkEVM as well. And it will also be a stage 2 rollup, meaning it's trust minimized.
Nice. That's very cool. I mean, it's this kind of path to decentralization is something that I'm recommending everyone to check, especially like there was a couple of like contribution like blog posts that they also pushed out. They're super interesting, like this table. So post Spectra, like how kind of like the future for both developer and kind of users will look like. I understand that the blob size will change, right? What are kind of like the things that we should expect?
You expect for Linea or just Ethereum more broadly?
No, in general, like both layer 2, but also like post Linea. I think like we're cooking different things around 7702, right? But what are the things like you see that will change could be for developers? Maybe, I don't know if for developers like the kind of like angle would change much, but I think for user they will expect also like a faster Linea, or what will happen?
Yeah, so we recently published the post around our roadmap. And my goal was to sort of break that out into 3 sections. So you have the user experience, developer experience, and then sort of like community experience, decentralization. On the user experience front, we've got some cool stuff. We have private transactions, which are, protect you from MEV, front running protection, revert protection. We're going to have faster block times as well. So Linea today is around 2 seconds, which is still 6 times faster than Ethereum, but we can do better. We can get down to like sub-second like block times, which is super snappy UX. We're going to reduce gas fees further with some optimizations around the way that we actually, submit zero knowledge proofs to the layer 1, where you can optimize there. And there's actually one EIP in Pectra around BLS curves that's going to help with that, which is super cool.
Nice.
On the DevX side, one of the interesting things we're doing is we're adding this new API, which is called ETH send bundle. This is really cool because you can actually send a bundle direct to the sequencer, and that can actually batch transactions together. So it's very similar to 7702, but it gives wallets and developers an alternative where, they don't have to necessarily ask the user to upgrade to a sort of smart contract account. Okay, so it's just helping that transition from today, where we have these EOA wallets, and users are sort of used to the approve and swap transaction, which is multi-step. They sort of lose out on different like account abstraction features that we're familiar with. With ETH send bundle, they'll be able to have this with the EOA. We'll also have support for 7702 with Pectra, which means you can upgrade using a type 4 transaction. And then eventually the goal is to have like full smart contract accounts as well, which is like 4337 and so forth.
Nice.
And then on the community side, that was similar to what we mentioned about getting towards a sort of fully decentralized, censorship resistant type 1 zkEVM that's also a stage 2 rollup. And that's actually one of our goals we've been discussing recently, is sort of exploring how Linea could be a based and native rollup as well.
Nice. Yeah, native rollup. You want to kind of like clarify what native rollups, because this roadmap, like I know the big on chain, kind of like came out with the 5 years roadmap. I need to kind of research more, but what kind of like native rollup in this context like means for the people listening?
Yeah, native rollup is really interesting. So today, when we think about the different sort of resources on, blockchains, you have execution, you have data availability, which is effectively bandwidth, you have storage, right? And today what happens is like data availability is on the L1, storage and execution happens on the layer 2. So what we're trying to do with the native rollup is actually move execution to the layer one. And to do that, the idea at least, because it's still very early, is that we would include a new precompile in Ethereum in the EVM. So it would require a hard fork, and it would be this execute precompile. So it takes like a pre-state, you do some processing, include the trace of the actual block and the transaction, the rollup, and then you have a post-state. Okay, and so what we're doing now is we're actually executing the rollup within Ethereum itself. So you can effectively think of it as like a EVM within the EVM. So that's the goal of a native rollup. The cool thing about Linea is because we've designed it to be completely EVM equivalent. Every Ethereum client is a Linea client. Like the bytecode is exactly the same, which is not the case for pretty much any other rollup tech stack.
That's super interesting.
And so our transition to be a native rollup is going to be like seamless. We haven't modified any opcodes, we haven't modified any precompiles of like the EVM itself. So we're going to be able to transition to being a native rollup pretty much as soon as the hard fork is ready.
Nice. So native rollup is coming post hard fork.
Yeah, it's not been. So we still need to have an EIP. So it's mostly in the sort of research phase. There's some forum posts. Justin Drake put out a forum post recently. Some good discussion there. The next step is to get to an EIP and kind of refine that, and then actually look to include it in a hard fork. So my optimistic timeline, this year it's all about Pectra. Then we have Fusaka, which is going to be about EOF and peer dApps as well, increasing the blobs further, which is definitely the right priority. I think next year, like maybe early next year, mid next year, we'd look to have another upgrade, which will include this native execute precompile.
Nice. Yeah, that's super interesting. And in terms of like use case, is there kind of like specific like type of like companies or use case? I know now it's super exciting, like Linea on Aave, like there is a lot of like things, the the name chain, like what's on ENS on Linea. It's super cool, right? Do you see like any priority use case or vertical being kind of like focused for Linea specifically, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, my philosophy is that public blockchains excel at, they offer a strict global consensus, which means they're perfect for use cases that require objective money or objective identity. So our goal with Linea mainnet is to focus on the money use case, right? We want to focus on payments. We have the MetaMask card. We're building what we consider a non-custodial neobank. You'll be able to save, spend, lend, borrow, and win rewards all on chain without any intermediaries. And so that's going to be the primary focus for Linea mainnet. At the same time, like you mentioned, we have the Linea technology, which is an open source stack being used for other use cases like ENS's name chain that's coming out later this year. And that's the objective identity piece, which is also super cool, right? You'll have your .eth name. You can sort of, apply that identity across the entire Ethereum space. So those are the kind of two use cases that we'll be focusing on.
Yeah, that's, payment is huge, right? And for the people that didn't know, there is MetaMask card, and you can just need to put, like, I think a bunch of people saw like videos and stuff, but you can put basically USDC on Linea, and you can basically offer them directly. And the cool thing is that now, since a couple of weeks, you have also like 1% cashback rewards. And I think we're also working.
Lots more coming as well. Yeah, it's really exciting. I get so excited I forget what's already out and what's coming, but it's
Nice,
going to be cool.
Nice.
And the reason that it's so awesome is that it's one of the few products I find in crypto that it's like materially better than what we have today. Like alternative solutions in non-crypto, where people have cards and they have reward programs. Like this is already a product, right? But with crypto, because of DeFi, this permissionless innovation, being able to access things like Aave, whilst you have a spendable, like ready to spend every time you tap your card. When you're not spending it, it's there earning yield for you. Like that is super cool. And it's only available because of DeFi and crypto. So we're going to be able to offer better solutions to people who might be skeptical of crypto, might not understand the use case. And I think it's going to be super interesting.
The value prop is extremely strong. And also the fact that you're getting like, USDC kind of like 1% cashback, like the USDC part is not kind of like in fluctuating or like on liquid token. There is a lot of like things that are super interesting, and we're working a lot on different stuff. So that's exciting.
One of the actual goals for Linea mainnet itself as an ecosystem is to make sure that we have integrations with every local exchange for on-ramps, that we have integration with payroll, so your salary can get sent direct to Linea mainnet confidentially, and then you can spend it. And then also integration with all local stablecoins. So anyone, if you can use GBP, Euros, USDC, or you can use even more like long tail assets, then it's, everyone will be able to do what they want with the card. Yeah,
that's super exciting. Yeah, the team is not just cooking, but is also like shipping fast. And,
yes.
The fact that also like, I think generally like being part of like this umbrella of like products, having, this kind of like, the MetaMask relationship, having like this kind of like network is also, I think from the user perspective, I think is a stronger value proposition, right? So that's something I'm super excited about. But I'm always like seeing also like debating, not just technical, not just kind of technical debates, but also like more high level stuff. And I just want to ask you like, EVM is one thing, right? And I'm asking, when we're seeing kind of like meme coin wars around like Solana, we see all the ecosystem kind of like just flourishing, or let's say that, right? But what's kind of your take, more high level? Is this the right way to kind of like onboard users? Will user touch like layer 2 in general? Like how we are dealing with like these cross transactions, but most important is that does user need to care about how a cross-chain interoperability transaction works? How we solve this kind of like usability onboarding, because at the end of the day we're trying to build something better, at least a better usability for users out there, right? I don't know if you have take on that. It's mostly about a very high level question.
I have a slightly controversial view on this topic of interoperability. Like it's definitely important for the user experience. When we move from chain to chain, it should feel super smooth, almost instant. We shouldn't have to introduce new security and trust assumptions to do that, because the user, they take security for granted. It should be up to the developers and the infrastructure providers to make that right. What I believe, though, is that there's not going to be this sort of long tail of chains necessarily where we need to support. I think you'll still have these vertically scaled chains, these L2s like Linea, where you'll be able to process hundreds of thousands of transactions. There'll be a very valuable state where there's already users and apps and liquidity. Through the base native rollup sort of roadmap, they'll be extremely tightly connected to Ethereum itself, being able to potentially actually be composable with the Ethereum itself. And I think that will provide us with the sort of the scale and the supply of block space to actually meet the onboarding and demand of the users. And so interop's definitely important. Do I think if we were to solve interop today, it would solve Ethereum's problems and maybe improve the price of ETH? I'm not sure. I think it's a sort of scapegoat for some of Ethereum's recent like criticisms. However, what I do see is that we're going to have a few extremely secure, scalable, ecosystems, L2s with great developer experience. And so they will be the hubs that actually bring people on chain to Ethereum. And then later on, through things like base native rollups, we'll be able to sort of compose and really nicely interop between like the ones that actually have the sort of deep capital markets and hub of liquidity.
Do you think we are missing some pieces in terms of like scalability?
Yes.
Because I was chatting before with Christopher Piblico, and the question was, are we missing some kind of like developer tooling around? But I think like for you is even more like on a bigger scale, like what are kind of the gaps, or what are we missing? If even we're solving scalability, and I think like Linea and the decentralization roadmap is the way to go, what are kind of like the other gaps that we should work in parallel to kind of like, onboard more users and onboard more developers?
So I think for scalability, there's two parts still which we just need to continue down the path on. And that is just like pure execution, right? Like how many transactions can we process? There's lots of cool stuff happening here with like pipelining block construction, even things like pre-confirmations. Like we'll have sort of centralized block production and decentralized block validation. So we know what that looks like, but we still need to get there. We're still way away from where we need to be in terms of throughput. And then you have the ZK snark side, which is we need to continue to get the cost of real-time proving down to, order of magnitude lower in terms of like cost and maintainability. And so we just need to keep doing that. In terms of the developer experience itself, I actually think we're in a pretty good place. I think the tooling is really good. I saw Foundry V1 launch recently, which looked awesome. I think there's a lot of education, a lot of tooling. I think with AI agents as well, that will sort of help to abstract away the sort of nuances and complexities of like Solidity and like the underlying VM, where you're just, most of it will be done, help or supported with an AI agent. So I'm like pretty happy with where the developer experience is thus far. I think the big problem still is more on the user side, which is the onboarding, right? Like it's still really painful to get people from fiat into crypto on chain, which is why I'm super excited about things like payroll, where like, your employer could like send your salary confidentially directly on chain. Like that solves the on-ramping problem like, immediately. So that's to me the sort of biggest focus of the industry, where to be honest, there's actually not much like proactive like initiatives taking place on the user onboarding side.
That's true. I mean, I'm when we look about one thing is the electric capital report for developers, but I really read quite deep the reports on A16Z around kind of the use case, and one of the biggest use case that I think we're never really speaking about, or we started speaking about around emerging markets, is like stablecoin issuance, or just stablecoin transaction is huge. That's why kind of like basic DeFi models. And at the end of the day, it's not just about, we think about on-chain transactions, but at the end of the day, it's also like, could be stablecoin transaction, could be on-ramp, off-ramp, even offering basic like financial kind of financial, let's say, operation that we are offering right now from intermediaries in Web2, right? That's something that I think it's super valuable. And I think that's why people underestimate the power of like off-ramping with a MetaMask card, for example. Yeah. Because it's just the flexibility also. It's not get an extra provider or get an extra things. You just have some Linea USDC kind of like laying around. You can off-ramp. The fact that you can actually embed fully on-chain with this kind of like more stuff around rewards is super interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. I think we're almost on time, Declan. What any other things that you want to kind of mention? Any AP they're excited about? Anything that kind of like we're shipping or we can say without not saying it? What can you tell us? Yeah.
Something that happened recently, which I'm super excited about, is we completed what we would call like the arithmetization for the zkEVM.
Yeah. Oh, I saw the tweet, right?
Yeah, you saw it. Yeah. So Olivier, his team inside Linea has been working on this for 4 years now, pretty much. You know, so each of the EVM opcodes and precompiles, it's almost like handwriting the constraint system. We're talking like, I think over around 5 billion cells. Like, this is a huge endeavor, which was recently completed and will be rolled out into mainnet. The reason that is really interesting is because this is the most efficient way to zk prove the EVM. You know, it's like, I always like to use comparisons, right? Like it's like finely tuned towards the use case. So if you want to have a car that goes fast, you build an F1 car. Yep. You know, you have your sort of commuter SUV vehicle when you want to go to the shops and pick up groceries. But if you want to drive fast, you build an F1 car.
Yeah, of course.
We have built an F1 car. Yeah. And that's really awesome. And so I think this sort of zkEVM that's handwritten, which is now the last and only remaining zkEVM, is a really exciting moment for Ethereum, because we're going to be able to use that for the layer one, for Linea, bring more people on chain securely, and in a way that the cost is still extremely low. So very excited for the zkEVM.
Nice. And everybody can use it.
And everybody can use it. Yeah.
This is the cool thing, huh? This is the cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Declan. And I probably see you in Denver. And until then, thanks everybody for listening to this.